Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we're delighted to have a very special guest, Ray Taylor, who is a retired engineer and author, and a sci-fi author in particular. So I'm kind of keen on this. I got into reading from all my father's old science fiction paperback books. So I love science fiction. So Ray, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm here in Michigan, and the weather has decided to be nice today.
Oh, well, that's good. We're in New Jersey, so the weather is deciding to be extremely hot today. Well, Ray, thank you very much for joining us. We wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. Thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Ray. Yeah, I grew up with sci-fi and fantasy myself, so that's what I read primarily. And don't ever try to write it because I'm not sure that I can do it justice. But it's always fascinating me. I come up with ideas sometimes, but I'm always thinking about the whole world building idea of even if you set it on Earth, future Earth, and I got to think about all the other things that might be happening, and then deal with all that on top of my story. Sometimes I find it pretty daunting. So I'm always impressed by people that can write sci-fi and do it well, and that's why we're having you on. But specifically, we want to talk to because a lot of sci-fi and a lot of the stuff that I read too tends to be often very it's like a dystopia usually, right? Or it's sometimes hard sci-fi, and that turns some people off. But then you have that argument of if it's not hard and then something doesn't seem likely, then people don't like it for that reason, right? So you write in sci-fi that's not necessarily on those kind of things where you're hard or dystopian, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you write and how you got started, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, I write what might be called humorous or positive science fiction. My catchphrase is science fiction you can enjoy, and I describe it as if Gilbert and Sullivan were to stage a space opera, it would kind of look like this, with while they're being bankrolled by Flo Ziegfeld.
I love that.
Okay. Or an alternate description is Starship Troopers hijacked by Monty Python.
Oh, I love that too. That's a good one. I'd buy that one. That's a very good marketing tagline.
Okay. My first published novel is called The Grand Imperial War. And the idea for it came when I was in a used bookstore, and I came across a book called The War for a Persian Lady, which was a historical account of the Anglo-Persian War of 1857. It was just a crazy Victorian war. What happened was the British ambassador to Persia had an affair with a Persian princess, and that word of that got out, and there was a scandal, there was a riot, and the ambassador had to flee the country. And the Shah of Persia decided he was going to seize an Afghan border city because this was the perfect excuse. And then the British declared war, and it was just one crazy comedy of errors from the very start. And I said, that's a story I can put into science fiction. I'll set it in space in the future. And that's a Grand Imperial War. It's from the viewpoint of a minor officer who gets swept up in this, and he's over his head. There's court intrigue and romance and desperate battles and secret missions. And that's the type of, I call it a light space opera.
I love that. And what a great inspiration from like the British, because the British Empire and their funny wars back then. I'm a history major. It's like some of them, you study them and they're like, oh, this sounds like fiction. And then I love the idea of taking that into something that's accessible, like a space opera.
Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is that I didn't start off writing this way. Growing up, some of my favorite science fiction books were like Andre Norton's Daybreak 2025 or 2250, which is post-apocalyptic, and Planet of the Apes, and Logan's Run, Last Babylon. And then about the time I had kids, suddenly all of that became a lot less interesting to me, because I couldn't help but imagine my family in that situation. And I said, I just can't enjoy reading or watching this anymore. And that's probably the start of where I started turning towards more positive science fiction, more humorous science fiction.
Oh, I totally relate to that. The world is such a crazy place at the moment, and so many horrible things are going on, that when I want to watch something on television or read a book, I want it to be escapism and just taken out of like the horrible realities and the horrible consequences of things in reality.
Mm-hmm. And I think that dystopian impulse grew out of the post-World War II Cold War. Everyone was scared of nuclear war. And, I grew up in that. And it was just in the background all the time. We were for decades, the world was 15 minutes away from nuclear apocalypse. And we just kind of accepted it and didn't think about how crazy that was. Science fiction writers did think about how crazy it was and tried to warn us about that. I think it was Theodore Sturgeon said, any writer can look at flying cars and write about that, but it's a science fiction writer's job to write about the traffic jam in the sky. And I think people took that to heart, which is fine, but along the way you lose sight of the fact that people have been dealing with crazy situations for tens of thousands of years and living and thriving with them. So the future is not going to be all negative, and it's not going to be all positive. It's going to be a mix, which I try to capture in my writing.
Right. I think of it when you say that, the sci-fi writer's job is to warn you about the future. That's one job. The other side is to guide you towards a better future, right? Mm-hmm. So, the negative stuff is like, hey, let's make sure this doesn't happen. And the positive stuff is, hey, we could make this happen if we put our resources towards it. So why don't we do that?
And I think it's easier to write a dystopian or a negative or post-apocalyptic story. A couple of my favorite movies are The Fifth Element, which is positive, and love it. The Back to the Future movies, especially number 2, and Robert Zemeckis, who made those movies, he said that in the second movie he had the choice of how he was going to portray 2015, which is in our rearview mirror, and he said anybody can have a negative future. He said it's much harder to have a positive, like Art Deco future like he did. And he accepted that as a challenge. And I think it's a good challenge, because, when you're writing dystopian, it's easier to write about the conflict and the villains. You can make them really bad and the stakes are high. So it's like, yeah, that's great. But after a while, it gets a bit boring.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be nice to imagine a world that you would like to live in rather than one that you're scared you're going to live in.
Yes, and I think we will probably get a mix of both, but I think we'll probably tend towards the positive, because people just get tired of stuff that doesn't make sense, and they'll steer away from it. I mean, we steered away from nuclear war.
Well, yes.
So
absolutely, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. So I love Back to the Future too, because it's future. It's like, it's not actually, I mean, okay, we don't have flying cars and hydrating pizzas, but Pizza Hut still exists and all these other things kind of still exist. So how does that impact the world, the future worlds that you create?
Okay, well, I borrow heavily from Star Trek and movies like The Fifth Element. And I say, okay, We're going to expand out into the universe. We're going to figure out how to travel faster than light. We're going to colonize other planets. And, that's not really a bad bet. I mean, heck, we've got a billionaire planning to plant colonies on Mars. And we've got AI, or something like AI, taking jobs away from people, sort of. And there is a Mexican physicist named Alcubierre who came up with a theoretically plausible way of making a warp drive. It takes a heck of a lot of energy, but it could happen. I mean, maybe it's going to be like fusion power, just 30 years away for the last 60 years. But
yeah, true.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're also heading towards, you could arguably say, the world of the Terminator, right? Where, robots are coming, AI, like you said, is coming. In my, if I took some might say a realistic view, some might say a negative view, I could say we're very much headed towards that, right? Where we're starting to pump out all these humanoid robots, and we're starting to throw around AI. And there's some cases where, like with Anthropic, they did some studies with AI, and it created some cases where the AI actually tried to rewrite itself rather than get turned off. So it's a slippery slope we're on.
Yes,
yeah,
it is.
This is why I want to read Ray's books rather than
the
newspapers.
True, but I mean, okay. Think of it from the AI's perspective. I mean, what really motivates them? Do they really want to bother going to the trouble of exterminating us? I mean, we're actually kind of interesting to have around. So maybe they will say, "Oh, well, let's be good citizens and not wipe out the human race."
Yeah, hopefully. But you can look at the Matrix side of it and be like, why they decide that we're inefficient, and they maybe just use us for slave labor, batteries. But yes, I mean, there's both sides you can always look at, and we never know until we get there. I just think it's interesting because if Cameron wrote Terminator now, it would almost be more relevant and as a warning of what we're heading towards, whereas back then it was like so far in the future that it was that'll never happen. But if you write it now, and it's almost like you just ripped that from the headlines.
Yeah,
and that's always great sci-fi. I find is like the stuff not necessarily not always when it's negative, but the stuff that sort of comes true. You talk about Star Trek, right? And they had their little pads, which were before the iPad, and some say that's kind of what it was designed on, is those little pads that they're all using on the deck, and now we all have iPads, right? So it's like sometimes you can take that and you can go positive direction, and hopefully that is, maybe we need more positive sci-fi so that the people in charge start using that as a template instead of something like Terminator.
Yeah. I think it's much more likely we'll be somewhere in the middle between a completely positive future and an apocalypse or dystopia. That said, there's probably going to be some pockets of dystopia in our future. Read any history, you know that it can get quite grim at times, but it doesn't extend worldwide, and it doesn't last for all that long. Well, I shouldn't say all that long. It doesn't last forever. Okay.
In the grand scheme of humanity, it doesn't last that long. In an individual lifetime, it might seem like forever.
True.
Okay. But I think I needed this therapy session today because you're making me feel better about the world.
Okay.
But okay, so how do you? I like the idea that that where you read some history and then you just like, let's take that and put it in space. I wonder if a lot of books are like that. I never even really thought of that. I always start the other way. I think about, okay, science fiction story, I'm in space, or I'm on a planet, or I've built this invention, but it's almost like figure out the story first and then just say, let's put it in this sci-fi environment. And then that's almost like a great easy way to do it and add a lot of depth to it.
Okay. Well, here, let me tell you about how how I came up with the story for a book of mine that's about to come out in September. It's called The Diesel-Powered Starship. Okay. I couldn't sleep one night, and I got up, went downstairs, turned on the TV. There was a movie on called Space Truckers. Okay. Have you ever heard of this movie?
I remember that. That
Nope.
was a wild movie.
Campy.
It was.
It was so bad it was good.
Yeah, those are the best ones.
It had that wonderful like diner that was a circle in space, and
Yes, okay. So I thought I was sitting there watching this movie, thinking this is so bad, this is stupid. And the spaceships, they looked like 18-wheeler trucks. Okay, and I thought, why would you want that? And I just wondered. I said, I wonder if they're powered by diesel engines, and that got my mind spinning. It's like, okay, why would you power a spaceship with a diesel engine? And I said, and being an engineer, I knew that diesel engines are different than gasoline engines because diesel engines don't use spark plugs. You get the internal combustion from heat and compression rather than a spark.
yeah.
Okay. And I said, okay, the only benefit that a diesel engine has is no electricity. I said, what if you had a faster than light drive that couldn't tolerate an electric circuit? What would that mean? And I thought for a while and took some notes and noodled around, and I said, okay, say you had a star drive that couldn't tolerate electricity. That means that you can go to other planets, other stars, but you've got to leave the 20th century and the 21st century behind, start over again with pre-electrical technology when you get there. And at that point, I said, all right, here we go. We've got people who have to start over again when they go to other planets. And that's how I started writing the diesel-powered starship. And that's an idea, and I needed a story. And I said, okay, well, the people in the other planets, they are going to pretty quickly feel alienated from the people back on Earth because, they're months away and they have to live primitive lives, primitive 19th century lives. But the people on Earth will still want to retain control. So there's the conflict. And it's basically a story of rebellion. The people on the fringes trying to break away from Earth. Okay. And it's told from the perspective of a merchant captain who becomes a commerce raider for the rebellion. And that grew out of a book I read that told me that the infant U.S. Navy was more interested in commerce raiding on the British because they couldn't challenge the British Navy one-to-one because the British Navy was just too powerful. So they concentrated on basically piracy or privateering. And the infant U.S. Congress subcontracted the job out, issuing letters saying, okay, you can prey on British shipping. And so that's what the diesel-powered starship is about.
I love that. I love how it's all reflective of real history.
Okay. It's really just, you'll see things, history repeating itself or rhyming, as someone said, and it's just human nature reshuffled and dealt in different places and times.
I love if you hadn't if you hadn't had that bout of insomnia and got up and watched a terrible campy movie, you never would have had the idea for the book at all.
Exactly right.
So do you look at the story that you're going to write and then intentionally try to figure out a way to make it sort of a positive sort of theme, or is it dependent on the story itself?
It doesn't, for me, it's not really dependent on the story. I start writing, and as I'm writing, the humor just jumps out of me and onto the page. One of my favorite movies is the Three Musketeers from the 1970s with
oh yes, Michael York.
right. And if you watch that movie, the side characters are making these comments. Like at one point, somebody's being carried in a sedan chair, and the guy's carrying the sedan chair is like, "Oh, he's put on some weight." And Michael York is trying to blend into a street scene, so he acts like a beggar, and a beggar sitting next to him says, "Hey, go get your own corner." Stuff like that. And that's like, if you pay attention, you can insert stuff like that, and it lightens the mood, and it
Right.
it makes the world building deeper going along, because it's not just, there's all this stuff going on outside of the main story, so you just slip it in, and it to me it seems it lightens the mood and tells you that as concentrated on the main conflict as you are, there's a whole wide world, or many worlds, going on around it. Okay. Along with that, I'm a discovery writer, and my stories will tend to wander a bit. I mean, they don't wander, but they wander from what I had originally planned.
Right.
Characters will do things that surprise you. When writing Diesel-Powered Starship, I had a side character, and I had great plans for this guy. He was going to stick around and be kind of a devil's advocate for the main character. He and the main character started arguing, and he jumped up and stormed out of the room, and I sat back from the keyboard and I said, "He ain't coming back." And he left. I brought him back later in the book after he, had a chance to calm down. But I didn't plan on that happening. He made that happen himself.
They always say that's a sign of a good writing, I think. When you're a discovery writer and your characters do their own thing, it shows that your characters are stronger than your desire to make them follow your quote unquote plot.
Well, thank you.
I think discovery writer is a better term than what we used to call a pantser, right? I think it's pretty much the same thing, right? But it's sort of evolved because pantser makes it's sort of a negative connotation of like you're just making up as you go along. Discovery writer is a little bit more nuanced. It's not quite like that. So you're a former engineer, so I assume that informs a lot of the sci-fi that goes into your books. But where do you like you mentioned that you don't really write hard sci-fi, right? So what is the line that you draw to how much you want to go into in terms of the nitty-gritty of how things work?
Okay. Going back to Diesel-Powered Starship, I wanted to stay away from how the faster than light drive works, because I don't really have a manual sitting over here telling me how that works. But I said, okay, here's all these auxiliary systems, and I can just hand waving them. I can draw people's attention away from the fact that I have this nebulous star drive by designing systems around it. Okay, it's powered by a diesel engine, but you're inside of a spaceship. Diesel engines take air. How do I address that? And I said, okay, this won't tolerate an electrical circuit, but genetic engineering is fine. So I had them, this society, design a bacteria that takes the CO2 and carbon monoxide exhaust from the diesel engine and rearranges it and generates generates breathable oxygen. And I looked up and found that a diesel engine only consumes 12% of the oxygen that goes into its feed. And I said, okay, that's good, because that reduces the load on this genetically engineered bacteria. And I said, okay, the genetically engineered bacteria, I'm just going to arbitrarily say that grows on a plant that's called stinkweed, because it's just terribly, it smells terrible. And then the dead bacteria, the bacteria dies after a while, and it gets caught in these filters. And two of the characters are having to clean the filters. It's our time to clean the filter. And they're like, oh God, this is really bad. This smells bad. Okay. And lighting in the spaceship, you can't use an electrical light. So there's a bioluminescent, another genetically engineered bioluminescent bacteria that they run in pipes through the ship for lighting. So I kind of geek out on the auxiliary systems around that. And it's a good way to distract away from stuff you really don't want to talk about, which is how I'm breaking the laws of physics to make these people go faster than light.
Well, I think that's one of those things that is kind of accepted in sci-fi, even in hard sci-fi, because it's so faster than light travel is such a key tenet of the genre that I think that's one of those things that people aren't so nitpicky about, because there doesn't exist, but we still want stories about it. So we'll ignore that.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Let's see. My first published novel, Grand Imperial War, they're in armored, they're in mech suits. The soldiers are. So I kind of borrowed that from Starship Troopers. But as you said, mech suits are accepted in science fiction, okay? Except for people who love hard sci-fi and no, we don't have the technology for that yet.
It's funny because we're getting quite close to it.
Yeah, I think, if we've got robots, I think you just make a hollow robot, right? But yeah, I think there are certain things. I feel like we had a discussion about sci-fi on this podcast a while back, and discussed the idea that there are certain things that are just accepted as, you don't really have to explain them. Everybody just, faster light travel is definitely one of them. Teleportation might have been another one, where it's like, you guys do you really want to hear every story about, now we got to take the shuttle down to we got now is it going to be a travel blog or a sci-fi story, right? So, accept that because it moves the story along. Yeah, so it's interesting too, because a lot of people tend to gravitate to the dystopian stuff, like we were saying. And I love it. I just finished watching Squid Game, right? It's super dystopia. But like you said, if you try to think about it in terms of what you want out of life, nobody really wants that. And we talk about escapism and reading to escape and live in this world that you would rather live in. A lot of people read romance for that reason. You should get swept up. You'd love to be swept off but then it's almost the opposite with these dystopian sci-fis, where nobody wants to live in these worlds, but for some reason we still want to hear about them. And I wonder why that is. Do you have any thoughts on why people are so drawn to that, even though we really don't want to be in that world?
I think it's a simpler situation. I think people are drawn to it because of its simplicity. The good guys and the bad guys are so clearly defined and separated. The bad guys in zombie movies, the bad guys are the zombies. They're mindless, pincushions.
Right.
How can you? Do you have enough ammo to shoot the zombies? In Walking Dead, you have human villains, but the basic conflict is the zombies. In post-apocalyptic stories, it's will these people survive or not? How difficult can we make it for them to survive as an author? I think what I write is not really positive. It just seems positive in comparison to the dystopian and the post-apocalyptic. And you got to be
right. I mean, your story still had that element of rebellion, right? So it's not, you know, they weren't all just living in a utopia where everyone got along and sung kumbaya.
That would be pretty boring, yes.
Right. So I guess with the dystopian stuff, it's more about that hero's journey that is trying to conquer and fight against that dystopia that we're all sort of gravitating towards.
Exactly. And it's simpler to tell that story in a dystopia or a post-apocalyptic setting than it is in a complicated, mostly positive future. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say a more realistic future, even though it's science fiction. You've got people at odds with each other, and not butting heads, but not exactly working towards the same goal either.
I think that with dystopia, you're always like, what is the worst thing that human beings will do to survive? And then the nice thing about having a more positive outlook, it's like, what are the best things that humans could do to survive? I mean, one of the things I love about Star Trek, I've always been a Star Trek fan, is, you know, we're meant to be a utopian version of ourselves. And so you'll throw Captain Picard into a situation where he has to deal with a moral quandary. But fortunately, the Star Trek people live in a post-scarcity society, so he can do what is the right thing, rather than what am I willing to get away with to survive.
And I think you could probably look back on human history and see that progression. You know, most people used to live in abject poverty with not really much control over their own lives. It was a very hierarchical society, and the people in charge decided everything. And there's been less and less and less of that as time goes on. And I'm going to choose to believe that trend will continue.
I always think that deep down, I believe that humans are good people. And then if humans saw things from where you would see things, they would hopefully do the right thing. But I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit of an optimist that way.
I'll disagree with you in a little bit. I don't think humans are basically good. I just think we've gotten very, very good at dealing with people as they are. And we're getting better and better. And that's called progress. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if we have a lot of societies built around forcing people to be good. So maybe we're figuring out the best way to do that.
Yeah.
The best rules. And I mean, it's a lot easier to just take what you want and do what you want.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to live in a society. Otherwise, there'll be nothing to take anyway, or nothing to do, right? So there's that balance where it's like, okay, I have to realize that to be part of society, I have to make some concessions to getting everything that I want. And, you know, so I think, you know, a lot of the dystopian sci-fi is built around certain people have decided they're going to get what they want at the expense of the rest of the universe. But then the hero comes along to reset the balance.
Yes. Well said.
Okay, so when you're writing this, you know, you've written how many books now?
Let's see. I have 3 published books. Number 4 is coming out from History of Books in September. And then I have 2 more books coming out from Nazca Press. And I'm not sure when they're coming out, but the first one will be called Smitty's Guide to Interstellar Bartending. It's about an itinerant bartender who gets abducted by aliens. And for a number of reasons, they can't just let him go. And he ends up starting a bar on an alien spaceship.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
The title
And
makes me think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other book that's coming out from NASCA is called Sideways in Noir, from the case files of Joe Briggs' Cross-Time Private Eye. And it's about a 1940s noir detective who gets shanghaied to an alternate universe by his alternate self, to help this alternate self. And it's kind of episodic, and he helps this guy, and then he has to do something else, and then he has to do something else. And it's kind of a 4 episodes in that. So he's going to alternate. He's basically doing noir in alternate universes. So that's called Sideways in Noir. And then now I have a Substack. I started a Substack last year to basically build readership. And I just finished, as of this morning, my first serialized novel on that Substack called Containment Protocol. And I got a diagram here. And it's basically, here's the cover, if it ever gets published beyond Substack, of Tanks versus Dinosaurs in an alternate universe.
Tanks versus Dinosaurs, sold.
All right, that's free on Substack.
It's always amazing to me when writers do these serialized novels, because it's like, so much an important part of the writing process is the editing and the going back and changing and fixing, and when you are doing it as a serialized novel, unless you've written it all at once and you're just releasing that way, but if you're just releasing as you write, it's much harder to go back and change anything major, other than, if you pull it together into a book, I guess you can certainly make changes at that point, but you still got to satisfy the ongoing readers.
Yes, it's a bit of a high wire act, and I've had to do some tap dancing along the way. Next Tuesday, I'll be starting another serialized novel called Planets for Sale, about aliens come to Earth and induct Earth as a junior member in the Galactic Federation, and a fellow named McGee decides that he's going to go make his fortune out in the galaxy, and he ends up offering planets for sale. Okay.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So where do you normally come up with the ideas for the books? Because you've mentioned a lot of it came from history and of course watching bad movies, but generally, are you planning far out ahead to think about what your next novels are going to be, or is it just sort of they come to you when they come to you, when you get hit by the inspiration for whatever it is that's going on?
I brainstorm and I make notes and I start typing. I've probably got 6 or 7 novels started, and it's just beyond the ones that I mentioned. 6 or 7 started in various lengths. Some are sitting at 20,000 words, waiting for me to get back. Some are at 5,000 words, and I'm not really sure if there's more story there. And they're just always rolling around in my head, waiting for me to have time to work on them more. Containment Protocol, the Tanks and Dinosaurs, that started off as, when I first started on Substack, it's Substack's a containment, is voracious for containment. So I was dashing off little short stories to post, and the 1,400 word short story that started off Containment Protocol got a lot of feedback, and they said, we want more of this story. And I said, okay. And I sat down and started typing. I had no idea where the story was going to go when I did that, but fortunately it went on for 80,000 words, and it wandered. The plot wandered as I was typing it, and I said, well, there's an opportunity here. Do I want to take it in this direction or in that direction? Let's go this way. And it, like I said, it wound up to be 80,000 words. I've submitted it to a publisher right now, and we'll see if they want to publish it. I might end up, if they don't want it, I might end up putting Containment Protocol on Amazon, self-published. In fact, my first novel, A Grand Imperial War, was self-published on Amazon, and the guy who worked for the magazine, a guy who worked at the magazine I sold my first short story to back in 2006, saw it and said, "Hey, I'm at an independent press now. We want to publish this." So I am self-published, but then through luck, now I'm published at one traditional publisher and at an independent press, and possibly at a third independent press.
Well, good for you. Do you know, that's so interesting hearing this, because I think one of the things that very much comes across about your writing is the concept. I always say concept is king. You've got to be able to explain the plot of your book within a few seconds. And I think that definitely seems to be like one of the strengths of all your books, is they have really compelling concepts that you can outline in a single sentence.
I try.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the hardest parts of sci-fi writing, I think. Well, of any writing, really, but I think with sci-fi, you really have to get across your concept, and without having to also explain, well, but it's also set in this world, and, you know, where this happens. I mean, you want to be able to explain your concept and not have to explain, you know, everything that sort of supports it, which with sci-fi is often a lot of the book, right? With other genres, it's like, okay, well, that happens in normal life, so I get it. But if it's like you come up with this concept that really only works because you've done it in an alien society and it happens on a colonized planet and this and that, but you can't really go into that when you want to explain your concept really quickly.
No. And I, for instance, Diesel-powered starship, I think the name hooks people and gives me maybe another sentence. Word of explanation. Makes them listen for 2 sentences instead of 1. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. That's it, really, isn't it? That's, you keep them reading 1 sentence at a time, and and hopefully they get to the end of the book. Because I mean, I know I read a few books, and sometimes you don't finish them, or sometimes they feel like work. So if you're reading a book where it's a pleasure to read each sentence and you want to read the next sentence, that's the secret.
Mm-hmm. And humor helps in that regard.
Yes.
Also difficult to pull off.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing worse than reading a humorous book that isn't humorous. So it looks like we're approaching the top of the hour. So I was just going to say, before we wrap things up, I was wondering if you had any advice for people out there who are planning to put together their own science fiction novels, whatever you've been talking about in terms of like a positive view in the future. What advice do you have for people who want to write stories like that?
Just try to set it in it. Okay, build your world in a believable manner. Okay, it's I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to say that. Your characters are the most complex part of the story. I mean, you're setting in some alien world, that's great, but the characters are what really matter. So try to make them as real as possible by making them as complex as possible. I mean, you know, some of your characters are they're NPCs. They're very one-dimensional, but the characters, what you concentrate on. I mean, you got to do the world building too, but write your characters as if they're real people.
Oh, you're on mute there. Oh.
One other piece.
Well, I didn't want to disturb him.
One other piece of advice. All the novels I've talked about, I have one novel that I wrote first, and it's unpublished. New writers, get that first novel out of your system because it's going to be bad. and then shove it down into the dungeon of your C drive and let it sit there. Because I wrote my first novel, and it was horrible. It was a dystopian type thing. It was time travel, but it was too short. It was only 50,000 words. It was too literary, and all of the characters were very unsympathetic and filled with existential dread. And I looked back at it and I said, boy, I can learn a lot from this. And I tried to, and I think I did. So get that first novel out of your system and then put it aside.
Absolutely.
That's great advice. If you read my first novel, you would agree with that. So, Craig, do you have any final questions before we wrap up?
No, I just, I want to thank Ray for joining us. It's been really fascinating. And I mean, I agree with all that stuff. I mean, I'm the same way. The first stuff that I wrote is pretty cringy, but, you learn from it and you grow from it. I mean, if you're not, then you shouldn't be writing, right? But you have to take what you've done, and nothing is complete uselessness, because you can still, even if you're never going to release it, you can still learn from it, and there might be things you can draw from it, characters that you created that you can use somewhere else in a better story. But yeah, definitely, you have to sort of realize that you will get better, and don't always just sort of try to rush it out. Sometimes if you're worried about that, you might want to start your first story on your B idea, then save your A idea for when you're a little bit better. But thanks for coming on and sharing your insight with us.
And Ray, where can people find out more about your books? Where can they go to learn about the diesel-powered starship?
Okay, you can go to raytabler.com, which is my website, and on there you can find links to my publisher, soon-to-be publishers, my Substack page, where there's free content you can try on for size, and my Facebook page, where I post. Twitter. Go on, please.
Oh, I was going to say, no, that's great. Keep on going. We will put a link to your website right down below. You've also got it beautifully displayed behind you in that wonderful poster.
Yeah, that's a great poster.
Yes, this image is from Adobe stock. I purchased a license for it, so I can use it in perpetuity online, and 50,000 printed off copies.
That's a great picture.
That's our future if Elon Musk has his way. Sunbathing out there on Mars. Well, thank you so much, Ray, for joining us. If you are interested in finding out Ray's books, which you should be, because they sound like they have really compelling concepts, you should go and scroll down to the description, click on that link, and go and check out all his books. And while you're there is that big empty description box. Comment box. Make sure you leave Ray a comment. Let him know how much you've appreciated not just everything he shared with us today, but also I think the positive view of the future that he's brought. I think we need more of that in the world right now. And also there's that like button, that subscribe button, and there's a little bell icon. If you click that, you'll get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked, which of course there will be this time next week. So until then, cheerio.